If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniac. Hello everyone, hope you're all doing great. I just want to say, if there's anything hard or difficult that you're going through, remember things do get better. You can outlast it. There's brighter days and they will come. Hope you'll enjoy these stories too. I made sure to find some of the best ones I could, and I really enjoyed narrating these, so it should be good for you. Hope you're all having a great day and enjoy this. I'll talk to you soon. When I was a bit younger, I used to love to go and explore abandoned places. And what better place could you explore other than an old mansion? Now, I know there's mental hospitals and stuff, but they're usually desolate by the time you get there. Obviously you have to worry about police and stuff, but mansions, it's very unlikely that there's anyone there but you, and the people have often left in a hurry, so very little is actually taken with them. Now, I was exploring one that I'd always wanted to. I had my best friend Ryan there with me. We'd explored together for years and become quite good at it. He was my go-to guy for it, to be honest. Most people would say no out of fear, but he was fearless and pretty cool. We used to play soccer together back in the day. We're not as close now as we used to be, but at the time, it was great. Now, it turned out to be a night of exploring that I'll never forget. Now, to get to this mansion, you have to walk through a pretty dense forest. I didn't particularly enjoy the walk because I don't like getting bit by all the creatures and insects that lurk at night, but my friend Ryan told me to shut up complaining and to get on with it. So I did. Just as the moon begins to appear, we can see it, and my god is it beautiful in the summer air. There's one last glimmer of daylight as we approach, and it makes the place look truly harrowing, exactly like something off of the set of a horror movie. We decide on who should go in first. Come on man, you do it. I do it all the time. What, scared are you, Ryan? Hell no. Oh, I'll do it since you're such a big baby, I say. I grab the flashlight and go in first. Now there's a lot to explore. This is when we do something pretty dumb. We decide that we're both going to split up to explore it all. Now this is dumb because you don't know what's in there. The place could be booby-trapped, you could fall and get hurt, or someone could hurt you for all you know going in there. But we do so anyway. Ryan goes off to explore the basement while I stay up. I want to explore the top. Now, I don't know where Ryan goes, but I tell him just to call me if anything happens or if he gets lost. He says sure. We agree to call each other in half hour if we don't find each other. Now the time must have flied. I felt like I'd only been there for 5 minutes, but I look at my watch and it's already been 20. Not long before I have to call Ryan, I think to myself. Now I find myself in darkness, in a hallway. It's darker than anywhere I've ever been before. It almost seemed like I wasn't even of this earth. The moon was pretty bright now, but I can't see anything without my torch. Now I can't shake this feeling that I'm being watched throughout the time that I'm there. I turn my flashlight to the side, and I notice at the very end of the hall, there's a picture of an old looking man. Maybe he was a homeowner. I'm not sure. The weirdest thing? It feels like he's the one watching me. Oh wow, my flashlight starts to flicker. How typical. I go and check my watch for the time and it's been half an hour. I must have been in that room for 5 minutes. The time elapse is something that I still can't explain to this day. I start walking towards the photo though. I'm drawn to it. It's a feeling that I've never had before. Just as I start to, I get this terrifying feeling that I've never had before, that I should not proceed on any further. I decide to turn back, but as I do, I think I'll take one last look at this picture before I leave. Then I hear a loud bang sound. It takes me a second to realise what's happened because of the pure adrenaline. The pictures flew 3 feet off the wall towards me. Adrenaline takes over. I begin screaming, "Ryan, help me, God please, we need to get out of here." I can hear screaming coming from outside. I luckily find my way out thanks to Ryan screaming. I try and speak to him, but I can't even get words out. He just knows something's terribly wrong by the look on my face. I continue sprinting, and it's not until we're halfway home that I tell him what's happened. He said I've gone completely white. I have to stay at his house for a while to calm down. Now it's there that we agreed to never go back to that place again, and we never did. I had nightmares about it for years afterwards. I got word that eventually the place was demolished. Even to this day, I cannot bring words to even describe the feeling that I had while in that room. And what happened is like something out of a horror movie. The best way I can describe it to people is like I walked onto the set of a horror film where a scene played out the moment that I arrived. Have you ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, where Russell Crowe imagines his roommate and a little girl? He eventually learns to ignore them. It's scary how true that is. Seeing that movie was a turning point for me. I realised that maybe I could learn to live a normal life. And for an 11-year-old who'd been ordered to 100 different doctors, admitted to different mental hospitals, and tried everything, there was more hope than I'd ever had before. Every day since I was born, I'd see things, wandering around. I remembered seeing them before I remembered my own parents' faces. They ignored me. I can never touch them, but, I mean, that's what most adults seem like, to an infant. So why was it strange? It was pretty fuzzy. That's far back. No one remembers being a baby, but they've always just been there. About this time I turned 3. I think I realised no one else could see them. That's when my parents told me I started having imaginary friends. I talk about big animals I'd see, and they'd smile and humour me. If the animals I described had a few too many eyes and teeth, well, that's the imagination of a child, right? It wasn't until I was a little older that they started worrying about me. It was past it's cute, and they started to look at my drawings with concern. I'd become obsessed with drawing creatures no one else could see. For a kid, I think I was pretty good too. That was the problem. They really didn't like what they saw in my drawings. I remembered very vividly my mother grabbing one in particular I'd finished. I was so happy I got it exactly right. She looked down at the purplish grey blob, the appendages that didn't match the body, and a face that simply appeared wrong. To her, I realised now. She held it up to me angry, tears on her face, screaming at me to never draw it again, ripping it up and sending me to my bedroom. I stopped showing them my pictures after that, though I had a serious collection by the time I was 6. That's when they sent me to see my first psychiatrist. We spoke for a couple of hours, then once a week for a month and a half. I was so excited. Having an adult who listened to me about the creatures, one that didn't get angry, leave or shut the door. But I was pretty upset one day. That's the day she asked me if I knew the animals weren't real. I stopped speaking to her after that. The next 3 doctors lasted even less time. By the time I was 7 though, we found a doctor. She's amazing. She didn't seem to care if they're real or not, just that I was able to live life without being unstable because of them. I talked to her for 6 months. My parents were so much happier, and I thought everything was going to be okay. In that way, a child doesn't think about the future. One day, the doctor asked me if I wanted to show my drawings. That night I went home, pulled out the boxes of drawings from under my bed and closet. For the next week, I combed through all of them, picking the best ones. I was excited to finally share them with someone who I trusted, who wouldn't react to them. The next Tuesday, I pulled them out of the bag and happily handed them over to her. She stared at them for a long time, slowly going through the stack. Eventually, she looked at me smiling, asking if she could keep these for a while. I said yeah, and we talked about school for the rest of the session. As we left, she asked me to wait in the playroom and told my parents to step into her office. I was sure she was telling them I was okay and there's nothing wrong with my drawings, but my parents come out later and I knew something was wrong. My dad looked worried and my mum held me up close saying she loved me. That night was packed with a suitcase, and my parents told me that there's a place at the doctor's I should visit for a while. The way they described it sounded like a summer camp, which I'd always wanted to try, so when we got in the car, I was eager. I think you know though it wasn't summer camp. The hospital wasn't like what you'd see in movies. No white paint and fluorescent lights. There were bright primary colours everywhere. Paintings of cartoon elephants and dogs, and the staff wore uniforms with flowers and clowns on them. I was left in my playroom under the careful watch of the kindly nurse, who talked to me while I coloured. A purple cat that time. I knew better than to draw them in front of other people by now. After a while, maybe an hour or so, I think my parents came back with a man in a white coat over a green shirt and glasses. I remembered thinking his hair matched his brown tie. They introduced him and said I'd be staying here with him and some other children. I said can I go home instead. My mum was upset a little and turned away, and my dad knelt down and gruffly told me it's for the best and they'd visit a lot. I tried not crying as they left, telling me how much they loved me. They then left and I couldn't hold it longer. The nurse, whose name I learned later, held me and rocked me back until I stopped. She then carried me to a room with a small bed and a cubby for my suitcase. She then laid on the bed asking if I was hungry. I shook my head, saying I was just tired, so she sat down in a chair in the corner of the room while I lay there, still sniffling a little, falling asleep. I wake up to the sound of the door opening and she comes in with some food. She said it's dinner and I have to eat. Before I could though, she gave me a cup of small bright pills telling me I had to take them. I did so without arguing, quietly eating, going back to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night I awoken again and saw her dozing off in the chair, a book hanging from her limp fingers. I watched her for a long time, then went to my suitcase and began drawing the creature that was sleeping next to her. I put it under my mattress when I was done and returned to my dreams. The next day I met with the man with the coat and glasses. He talked for a while in his office, and by now, I was used to questions and new doctors asking me stuff. It was a week before my parents came. I didn't talk to them. I was annoyed. Then when they were leaving, I began sobbing. I hated it. I was there a year before I left. They tried every medicine they could, but nothing stopped me seeing the things. And eventually I learned to pretend I was okay when they tried a combination of pills that didn't leave me feeling sick or sleepy. I kept it up for a long time, and finally they told me I could go home. My mom and dad were happy to have me home. Things seemed to be normal, and I'm glad to be out of there. Now the next few years were turbulent though. Eventually they realised I was faking, and the doctors started again. The meds, they found the pictures, and when I was 10, it's another hospital. This one doesn't last too long. The doctors were pretty arrogant, and he was convinced I was cured within weeks. My parents were more skeptical, and less than a year later, I was in another facility. This time, this is one that isn't meant just for kids, where I met someone. He's probably the nicest person I ever met. The only reason I'm not still in some room drugged up. He was the one who snuck in the movie and explained that sometimes you have to ignore the things you see, that no one else can. To this day, I don't know why he took the risk and gave me the very unprofessional advice, but I'll forever be grateful for it. This is when I finally learned I had to do things to stay out of places like that forever. I was able to go to a normal middle school, and my art teacher loved me. I'd had a lot of practice after all. I never showed her the pictures I did in my free time though, of course. I went through high school like normal. It was as close to happy as I'd been in a long while when someone come in my life. She loved my art. We spent hours talking together about the shapes and colours. My first girlfriend. My parents are thrilled naturally. They took this as a sign I was really gonna be okay. We broke up a few months later though, when she found a piece I was working on. One of the ones I never meant to show anyone. She didn't like the things that lurked in my mind, she said. That pretty much sums up my life throughout college though. I get an art scholarship, and eventually found an outlet where I could share a few of the tamer pieces I'd previously hidden. Most people found them disturbing still, but few people thought they were awesome. I even sold one to a heavy metal band for their album cover. I still paint and even had a few expeditions now and then. Most of my income comes from commission though. I'd largely put everything behind me until one day a few weeks ago though. Now I hadn't mentioned them to anyone in years. I'd even shown nobody one of these. I was at a park painting, enjoying the sun, doing a few sketches for some side cash and tips. It was nice. Around lunchtime though, I grabbed a pita from a vendor nearby and a bottle of water, taking a spot under a tree to enjoy the shade. I saw one of them drinking from the fountain and watched it a while, standing up, stretching. I caught sight of something that made me freeze. There was a man, just some old man in a suit and hat, staring at it. At least it looked like he was staring at it. He had a little book in his lap and a pencil in one hand. Heart racing in my chest and heart pounding, I walked towards him. I sat down on the bench next to him and tried to catch a look at what he was scribbling. Sure enough, it was there. He was drawing it. A numb serenity washed over me, and I caught his eye. He raised an eyebrow in the universally recognized expression of what? I worked my tongue for a minute, testing my words, forming a question I wasn't sure how to ask. Finally coming out as, do you know they're there? Or what they are? He stared at me for a moment, studying me, confused. Eventually, he smiled sadly, shrugging, "For all I know, they're just in my head." Now, I'm not one to believe in urban legends or myths, but there's one thing that happened to me to this day that I'll never be able to explain. I have some family that live in Appalachia, and I was visiting for a while. I was staying in a log cabin there with their dog. I couldn't sleep one night, and I was awoken by the dog the moment I started to drift off. He was barking like crazy at the window. I was pretty scared because, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know the area and I don't feel safe on my own, and this dog's really small. When I look out the window, I think I'm dreaming. I rub my eyes and look again and confirm what I first saw. 2 glowing red eyes and some kind of winged creature in the distance. I collapse onto the floor in fear. The dog continues barking and it shocks me into getting up again. I quickly grab the rifle that is at the foot of the bed. I open the window just enough to let a shot off, and whatever creature it is quickly disappears into the night. I call my friend to drive out to me and take me out of there. He's sure what I saw was the Mothman, and I was being stalked by him. I don't like horror movies. In fact, I don't like anything horror. The sensation of being scared doesn't appeal to me. If I had to elaborate on why, and I typically did as a teenager, when my friends wanted me to watch scary movies, I would say I saw enough as a kid and they bore me. Except it wasn't entirely true. The truth was that there was a VHS that contained a strange mixture of cartoons and live action scenes that I watched at my grandma's house as a kid, and they horrified me. If I had to guess on the release date of the footage, I would have to say sometime between the 1920s to 1930s. I would sometimes ask friends if they knew what I was talking about, and I would receive a glimmer of recognition and understanding in response. Who hasn't seen a creepy old black and white cartoon after all, you know? But when I continued to explain what I remembered from the old VHS tape, the recognition would slowly disappear from their faces. Even while I described it, I knew it didn't make much sense. An egg-shaped man walking down the road with his arms waving around the sky. A swan whose neck sways back and forth to music in the background. Then, intermittent flashes of terrifying live-action footage. The audio consisted of mostly music, with heavy static, except for one moment where there's a man screaming. It was non-sensual, and similar to describing a dream that has the importance to you, but means nothing to anyone else. People would shrug their shoulders, saying they don't recall anything like that. Oh, is it Roger Rabbit? No, this isn't Roger Rabbit. Regardless, I loved visiting my grandma while I was a kid. My mom would drop me off there Saturday and come back for me on Sunday, giving me and my grandma all weekend to do fun things. She has a garden in the backyard where she grew a lot of different fruits and vegetables, so a fair amount of our Saturday morning was spent there. If my mum tried to get me to eat a tomato at home, I would balk, but my grandma's tomatoes were delicious when fresh off the vine. Even a 6-year-old boy could taste the quality in it. Then, There were the mall trips, which were too exciting for a sugar-loving kid like myself. We go to one of those colourful candy shops where she'd buy me a small bag of gummy worms. Then it was the clothes store, which always made me groan, and tried to convince her that I never again needed a new wearable piece of fabric. But I had to go through the motions of trying on a pair of shorts and set of pyjamas there. As the sun set, we'd be back in her home. My grandma always had to go to bed early and had to keep me entertained. She would direct me to her comfy floral couch and turn the tube TV on that was on the tall stand. She'd go back to the bookcase where she kept her VHS tapes and choose a tape that was specifically for me. This is one of the most strange footages that she ever showed me. As a kid, you tend to go with the flow. I shake my head looking back at how accepting I was when she'd put the TV on and stick the VHS in the VCR. She'd pat me on the head and say she's going to bed. I nodded and braced myself while also hoping that magically this time something else would be on the TV. She'd press play and then would leave her bedroom. The TV flickered in its unusual way and the title card appeared, but I couldn't read well at that age. That old sound music kicks in, and the egg-shaped man comes strolling down the white road, waving his spaghetti arms around. His mouth is in the shape of an O, and his arm reached so high that they go past the top of the screen. In front of him walks a swan, with the neck that looks uncomfortable when it bobs and bends to the music, which is a sound like pure static with some trumpets. I was always mesmerized at this scene. The flying animation and bad audio, something about it kept you watching though. Then the cartoon cuts and a real human skull flips up the TV screen. This is the point I would jump in my seat no matter how ready I was for it. The gaping eye sockets and jaw that, like all human skulls, had a terrible expression that looked as though they're excitedly smiling. The camera would pan out and slowly reveal the rest of the skeleton. There's no music now, and the only audio is the sound of static popping noises. The video starts to zoom out, and you see the entire skeleton frame on screen. I was positive that the skeleton would jump out and try and talk to me. It looked as though it was so alive with its jaw agape. At this point, I would grab my legs and look over my knees. When you're a kid, basic things seem out of reach. The entire house had its lights turned off, and getting up would mean walking into the depths of the darkness. There was no light near me, and even the thought of turning the TV off was terrifying. As upset as I was at the time, I could soon turn to feel angry. The screen goes back to the cartoon, the broken neck goose and the egg-shaped man, with the poor audio recording of the horns. At this point, a dancing bow-legged skeleton appears. They move about the dimensionless white space. The non-sensual dancing goes on for about another minute before the music stops and all you can hear is static popping again. All the characters look at the viewer as though they're making sure you're still there. A deformed face appears, no longer a cartoon. The face's lips are curled back, and it was groaning on screen. Looking back, I wondered if it is a sick man. As a child, I saw it as a zombie, his skin all decaying, missing in areas around his eye sockets and cheeks. The camera slowly zooms out, and it shows that it's walking towards the camera, groaning and stumbling. Now my knees are tight against my chest and tears are forming. I imagine the zombie grabbing me, rubbing his face against me. It will kill me this way, and it will take me somewhere dark and horrible, far away from anyone or anywhere that I know. The zombie disappears and is back to the cartoon, and Mummy has joined on to the meaningless movements. The swan continues to sway. The egg-shaped man waves his arms. The bow-legged skeleton dances. The mummy begins to unwrap itself. The latter rocks back and forth while taking the bandages from around its midsection to its neck. I felt as though they could see me. I was positive that their pupils were watching me, making sure I'm paying attention, so I'd witness the next live-action interlude. The man screaming. He's covered in blood, yelling no, please no. Then something off the screen hits him. The camera is too close to his face to make out what's happening, and his scream sounds like a primal, deep sound that I've never heard from any other human before. I would rock and sob freely at this point. I'd think of what I'd have to give not to watch this. I would give everything. The cartoon would come back on. All the characters are gone save the mummy. He's hanging from a noose at the top of the screen made from his own bandages. He sways slightly, and a title card appears. The end. After laying in the subtle light of the television's static, I would eventually fall asleep on the couch. The next morning my grandma would ask me why I didn't make it into the guest room. I'd say I fell asleep watching TV, but in actuality, I was too terrified to make the impossibly long midnight trek to the bedroom. Sundays were spent around the house. She'd give me crowns and I'd show her what I drew. Mostly houses and stick figures of people with the occasional shark. While relaxing like this at the kitchen table, my mum would pick me up and back home we'd go. I went there about once a month, and every time I went it seemed like a brand new excursion. I wouldn't think about the cartoon until she's ready to retire for the night. One of the days when my mum went to come and get me, her and Grandma ended up in the bedroom arguing. They're fairly quiet, so I couldn't make out what they were saying from the kitchen. I lazily drew some fish around my shark when my mum come out in a huff telling me to say goodbye. I gave my grandma a hug and we got in the car driving home. Like most kids, I kept track of some things but not others, so I didn't really keep track of familiar visits, and it took a while before I realised that I hadn't seen my grandmother in years. When I'm a few years older, I asked my mum if she still talks to her. She looked up from the Better Homes and Gardens issue she's reading, saying, "Grandma has a lot of things going on in her life, and visits are hard for her now." I could tell she didn't want to talk about it. I vaguely missed her, but at the same time, it was easy to accept the reasoning that she was too busy for visits. 9-year-olds believe most of what they're told. It wasn't until I was a 36-year-old that I went back there again. My grandma had passed away from a stroke, and I received word from my mum that I could take a walk through the house to see if there's anything I wanted. I couldn't believe I would ever see the inside of the house again. Even as an adult, I still remembered those cartoons. Not as vividly, they seem more like memories from a dream. But maybe I could find the strange VHS seeing it through an adult's eyes. The thought made me oddly excited, regardless of the chill that went through my entire body. Even seeing that couch again would be unreal. I went there with the copy key my mum had given me and walked through the front door. Immediately the smell of the home sent me back all those years ago of picking tomatoes and drawing with crowns. I remembered the house was so large, but it seemed like it was cramped and small now. I made my way through the kitchen and stopped for a moment to look around the table and reminisce back to those lazy Sundays and easier days. I then went to the living room and sat down on the couch. No HD TV. The tube TV was still here. It seemed as though it was so surreal this time. I went to the bookshelf to try and find the tape. Above the row of vintage hardcover encyclopedias sat a row of VHS tapes. I looked through it and found some old classics like Gone with the Wind. I couldn't find a single one that matched what I was looking for though. I made sure it wasn't hidden behind any of the other tapes or books before I moved to my grandmother's room. Why I thought it might be in there, I'm not too sure, but I didn't want to think it was missing. I searched through the closet and some drawers. I looked under the bed, but it was just shoeboxes filled with old letters and cards. I sat on the edge of the bed, scanning around the room. I saw something that an old lady would have kept. A makeup table and chair set. I sit down in it, looking through the drawers in the table. Some half used and some new makeup, no tape. I continued to sit there deep in thought, but I can't shake the feeling that something's over my shoulder. Then I look and see something rubbed against a picture frame with pressed flowers on the wall. It's a strange place to have a picture considering it's only 4 feet above the floor. I pick it up and look closer, and that's when I notice behind it are 2 small holes in the wall. A faint light is coming out of them. It looked as though someone took a long electrical screwdriver, sinking it through twice. I looked through the 2 holes and, in perfect view, was a floral, 3-cushioned couch where I used to watch that horrifying cartoon from. I sat back in my chair and thought for a moment. It's possible that those holes would have been there just to watch me, but the flowery wallpaper camouflaged it so well. I looked through the holes again, seeing the couch and the television. A television washed in the morning light rays, very different from how I remembered it. Staring at this scene, a realization sweeps over me. I begin to feel very cold, and I didn't want to consider the idea anymore. I look at the picture frame I had taken down, pressed red carnations arranged in a flattened boutique. I placed them on the frame next to me. I leaned over and put my head down, folding them into my arms. I wanted to stop my train of thoughts, but I couldn't. No matter how hard I tried, the terrible images kept on making their way to me. All I can see is a scared little boy sitting on that couch. He's wet from his own tears, hugging his knees through his chest. He was desperately hoping for Grandma to come to rescue him, but she never did. In the winter of 1988, bodies began appearing on the border between my town and the surrounding woods. A group of campers had stumbled upon a man in his early 30s, completely nude, almost perfectly preserved by the cold weather. By the end of the day, 2 more men had been found within a quarter-mile radius, all 3 naked, found lying on open ground, as though there'd been no attempt to hide them whatsoever. One woman and 2 men. None bore any visible wounds. The news exploded. It was a little backwoods town where not much happened. So when 3 strangers turned up, dead, hardly a mile away from each other, it became all anyone would talk about. I was just a kid then, a few months into 6th grade, and the rumours spread around school. Family breakfasts that morning were quieter than usual. My mum was horrified, poring over the newspaper as she wondered aloud if it was safe to send an 8-year-old to school. Jesus, she said, gesturing at the paper. Look at this. They put their photos in. That's not decent. My dad glances over saying, I bet you it's drugs, and this whole fuss is over nothing. Can I see? I ask, reaching out to take the paper from my mum. She pushes her lips and says, fine, but don't show your sister. I grab it and look over. There's 3 grainy photos of faces. I'm kind of disappointed, though I wouldn't dare say that aloud. Now while my mum is washing the dishes, I let my sister look. She stuck her tongue out and looked over them, saying, that one looks like William. She giggled, pointing to the leftmost photo. There's a man with dark hair and a grasp with a stubble. He's a boy in my class. It was so innocently morbid that I can't help to laugh. I got up to help my mum with the dishes, though as I occupied myself with chores, I couldn't help but linger on the strange deaths. My dad insists there's a logical explanation after all, that these 3 young people were drunk, stumbling through the woods getting lost, and you can imagine how they died. The following week, he was proven wrong. The autopsy is published. No trace of drugs, medicinal or otherwise, in their blood. No alcohol either. The cause of death couldn't be asserted. There was no physical trauma, no blood loss, no pre-existing medical conditions. The article in the newspaper declared it was mostly by shock. A sudden massive rush of adrenaline, essentially stunning the heart into inaction, that only seemed to be opening up more questions. One person might have been explainable, but 3? Was shocking enough to cause that to happen to 3 different people. A chunk of wood had already been put under police patrol when a new body turned up, nude yet unharmed like the others. It showed something pretty weird too, closely resembling a blanket around the woods. At night I'd lay awake thinking how awful it would be to die in that way, freezing alone with only the shadows stretching over you from the trees. Before the week's over, a 5th body sprawled in almost exactly the same spot. Somehow, no one knew where it had come from. One police officer interviewed by the press said she'd been passing through the area just minutes prior, and in the time that he's gone, it was like it had just blinked into existence. A fresh wave of rumours emerged at school, though now they're less nervously excited, more tinged with fear, though the evidence was frustratingly nonsensual. The unspoken consensus was that they'd been murdered. When a 6th body had appeared, a 10 PM curfew was imposed on adults and children alike. If I remember correctly, that was around the time the FBI caught wind of the case. The whole stretch of forest had been cordoned off with police tape, the perimeter constantly surveyed by a flock of different looking officers who made sure nobody got in or out. I used to play in that forest all the time with friends, and seeing it suddenly made into the site of 6 bloody deaths was surreal, to say the very least. That was what the media started calling it, though, the bloodless murders. Sometimes the bodies came in pairs, sometimes alone. By the 10th, there was a definite pattern. They vary in ethnicity and sex. They're all relatively young, 20s to 40s and all nude. Some even looked as though they had clothes on 1 minute before. Very strange. Now, have you ever been in a room where everyone's holding their breath? Every person just waiting for the ball to drop. The silence so bad you can almost drown in it. Now imagine a whole town. You want to know the strangest part about this? Weeks dragged on, and none of the bodies are identified. Their fingerprints are intact, but there were no known matches. DNA testing came up empty. A public campaign to find the identities of the bloodless victims turned up nothing. It was like these people had emerged from nowhere, deprived of their names and backstories. The victims are unmourned, blurred into one murky entity. It really got bad a month into the case. Some up-and-coming journalist, a guy by the name of Walton, I think, claimed to have uncovered the truth behind it all, and wrote a tell-all article divulging the details that hadn't been released by the police or FBI. Apparently, the bloodless murders weren't bloodless at all. It was true that most are untouched, but 4 of the dead had bites all over them. Whole sections of their bodies gone. One guy was missing almost half of his right side. One of the women was short of an arm. Bites might be misleading though. The missing pieces have been removed cleanly, almost too cleanly in Walton's words, as though they'd been scooped out or magically taken away. Walton claimed that he had the records to prove that the area was under even more intense surveillance than we'd guessed. Besides hundreds of cameras that had been covertly installed in the trees and throughout the forest, there's also lots of temperature data loggers and state-of-the-art recording equipment, along with a whole host of other devices that I couldn't even wrap my head around. Stuff that measures radiation and minute changes in composition of the air. If he's right, it must have cost a ton. Supposedly the data showed climatological deviations. Basically weird spikes and dips in temperature corresponding to the times that the bodies are found. If Walton was right, there's a good chance the FBI was in possession of video and audio recordings showing the origin of the bodies. It sounded like a crazy conspiracy, even though Walton hadn't been able to come up with a solid theory for the reason behind the cover-ups. That was the part that drove me crazy. I must have read the article at least 100 times. What happened next was a total lockdown. The newspaper was pulled from publication in the blink of an eye. Walton publicly apologised for having made fabricated claims trying to make a spectacle out of deaths. Not much was heard from him after. The case was under full jurisdiction of the FBI. According to my parents, the local police were all but shut out of it. I don't know what happened exactly, but suddenly the media coverage drops to zero. At school, the teachers gave me a talk about it, how we're all safe and there's no further spreading of rumours, okay? I remembered thinking about the weirdness of it the whole day, while a teacher was going on about the importance of following curfew. There'd been a team of adults who had quietly snuck their kids out of the room, ushering each one out through the back, and taking them back about 10 minutes later. One of them was my friend. After the assembly, I quizzed her about what happened over lunch and a stale pizza. It's really weird. They took a sample of my spit and some hair and nails. You think they're checking for diseases? I don't know how to answer her. The whole thing left a sour taste in my mouth. I was helpless and scared. The parents must have encouraged them not to talk about it either, because whenever I was bringing it up to my mum, they'd shut me down fast. In hindsight, I probably never should have attempted the plan. On a Friday night, I snuck out after the curfew, with only a handful of granola bars and a flashlight. I biked down to the woods. It didn't take long. It was one of those childhood routes that you know by heart. I wasn't even sure about what I was hoping to find. Chalk it up to a mix of curiosity and senselessness. There were patrols standing around, but I managed to make my way to a dense copse of trees and snuck in from there, my heart racing 100 miles an hour as I duck under the yellow tape. The sheer stupidity of my idea hadn't settled in yet. If what Walton had written about the surveillance had been true, there was no chance in hell that I wasn't going to get spotted. But being a kid and all, I'd hoped to be able to just get a slap on the wrist if caught. I turned my flashlight on to the dimmest setting and began my trek, playing that I knew the path through the woods as well as I thought I did. Time passed differently that night. Maybe I was walking around for 30 minutes, maybe it's 3 hours. The sky's inky black, and in the darkness the trees distorted themselves into more and more monstrous forms with each step I taken. All I know is that when I stumbled across the body, the world comes to a shuddering halt. Under the cone of artificial light, the body appears fresh, the skin still pink. I remembered thinking if I touched him, there might have been a swarm. His eyes are wide open, glassy as a river, face set in expression of determination. There was a tattoo on his bare chest, and some weird things written on it. I didn't question it further and escaped, never knowing the truth of it all.